How's everyone doing? Welcome to Making the Rounds with Emily and the Bald Eagle and Noam Chomsky and using someone's likeness without their permission, as well as Hot Pot. And if you
Yeah.
heard me say Malashango into the void, you know it's because I suck at checking for hot mic. Anyway, so we're ready to
I'm just
go.
sad that people didn't get to hear me complaining about how I haven't had anything super spicy yet. I haven't had anything that was like burned my
True.
insides, you know?
So
So
Sichuan cuisine does not match the hype. Either that or they see
no,
that.
it tastes really fucking good. It's either so I have a really high spice tolerance,
Mhm.
but it could just be that they see a white
Yeah, I
person
was
and
gonna
they're
say
like,
usually when
can't
there's a white
handle
person, because I
it.
remember I went to this Korean place in L.A. with Reira once, right? I went like very recently, last year even, and she wanted I forget what the soup is, but it's like the very funky soup. I forget what it's called. And then she was like about to
There's
order it,
a whole bunch of them, yeah.
but she was about to order it, and then the waiter like looks at her and is like, "No," and is like pointing to me like she won't eat that. It's like, all right. I did eat it. It was good. That's all I have to say. Anyway, continuing on.
Now I'm wondering what sour, because like most Korean
Yeah,
stews are really good because they're funky, because a
yeah,
lot of them have a base of like either anchovy or like when I make kimchi jjigae, I use anchovy
yeah. I can't
broth.
remember which one it was, but it was very. I wanted to say there was like a lot of fungus in it, but I'm
Sounds
not.
good.
It was quite good. I forget what was in it. It's been too long for some reason, and I'm not super familiar with Korean food, but it was good. Um,
If you told me, you'd probably recognize it. But I did have malashango tonight, and it was amazing. It
yeah,
was good.
Malashango is great. I love it. All right. Now that we're done talking about food and how we're white but still enjoy spicy food or something, I don't know what we're talking about exactly, but let us start talking about MSI related things. First of all, a lot of chatter so far has been about the format. I guess, like recently, just because we're approaching the final, specifically about uh, the basically the upper bracket advantage versus the lower bracket advantage. I think the main thing though is just what are your overall impressions on the format this time? Like, what would you change about it? Anything you think is good, bad, etc.
I mean, I think the format for me is, and I don't know if it's just because I'm so used to having Terabad formats for so long, especially at a tournament like MSI where there's just fewer teams.
Mm-hmm.
So format tends to matter more. And definitely the reason why people have thought that this MSI and the previous MSI were like so much closer isn't and better isn't just because we have a bunch of really strong teams all vying for the top and potentially like no clear favorite or like maybe two or three clear favorites, but I think the weird thing about it for me is like balancing the first part of plans
Mm-hmm.
and then the balancing how much of an advantage you think it is to not have some sort of like bracket reset mechanic
Yep.
in situated in the bracket, right? Because at a lot of other events, especially like FGC events, I think is the biggest like example in esports. Um, Currently, right now, you will have the team coming in from the upper bracket will come in with like either a game advantage or the person rather will come in with either a match advantage or their opponent coming from the loser side of the bracket will have to bracket reset them, essentially beating them twice uh, before, whereas the person from the upper bracket only has to beat them once, and that's because in order to effectively counterbalance the fact that coming from the lower bracket is supposed to be significantly more difficult, and then additionally that a lot of teams have said, and this also goes into a little bit into like how teams, like we kind of talked about this last week, how teams, specifically League of Legends teams, look at losses versus wins, and it's so much
Mhm.
easier to take information for improvement from losses
Yep.
versus wins, which means that naturally, despite the fact that if you're making it from the upper bracket, you're a better team and you should be rewarded with fewer games, it can be a reward to actually play through more games. So, I don't know what people are calling for. I was literally just talking to Jat about this tonight
Yeah.
over
Mhm.
dinner, and what he wants to do is some sort of like best of 6, like essentially kind of
For
what
grand
LPL
finals,
did
sure.
previously, where the team coming in from the upper bracket would get um some sort
An
of like a
advantage. Yeah.
game advantage.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was I was gonna say because LPL was like one of the first teams leagues to have double limb, and they had it in their playoffs like 2014 even. Because I remember because we specifically flew out to San Fran to produce the final in the Twitch studio, and we like stayed at a hotel, did all this, and we did like got into the studio, did a tech rehearsal, and then it was a 2 game BO5 because EDG had game advantage in upper bracket and just stomped OMG 2-0. So
I remember
yeah,
that.
it was spectacular. So I think that that's definitely one of the things because it's like if you're doing best of 5 and you give a 1 game advantage, it's too much of an advantage. But if you make a longer series, right? So that's been one thing that I've seen suggested. Another thing I've seen suggested is give the person in the upper bracket all side selects. Um,
Mm,
that so like every single game you have side select, which I don't mind. Uh, I already think it's weird that losing team gets side. I already think that's weird. Um, I get it's done for parity, but I feel like it's like I don't really understand the logic behind it other than you're trying to make the series artificially longer somehow. But uh, yeah, that's like one thing that you can consider. I've heard people suggest like bans eliminated, right, or something like this, but all of these feel strange. I think for me though, what is supposed to be the advantage of upper bracket is that you get to watch the other team play a series like as soon as the day before, right? Like
mhm.
you just watch what they did. You know they'll have like almost no time to adapt to play against you. What they're showing off most of their strategies in a lower bracket final against the third best team in the league. Ideally, you're super prepared off of that, and you're going into the grand final strong, right? I think part of the reason why that doesn't work that well is because you can't like scrim. If
Yeah.
you could use that day to scrim, I think it would make more sense. Because the problem is you can't use that day to scrim because usually teams are like taking a break as soon as they're eliminated. I think maybe if it's taking place in China, that might be different. Like they might have a different team to scrim. They could scrim like some old man teams for the old man
Yeah, that's true.
tournament and the old man cup. So they might actually be able to scrim on the day before the grand final, and also watch and prepare strategies specifically for the lower bracket finalist winner. So I think that that's still like a pretty sizable advantage in my opinion. Like I don't mind it as much as a lot of people do. That you only get like one loss, and that should be a major advantage. I think the extra day, if you are preparing well and if your coaching staff is solid, should be massive in theory, right? So, yeah, that's kind of my feeling on it. Because by then you've played so many BO5s in this tournament that an extra BO5 of practice is probably going to be completely outweighed by being able to prepare new strategies, being able to see another series where your team has to play the next day, etc. So I think that worth, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the bracket, I think, I know we did like the matchup swap in the lower bracket so that we aren't getting matchup repeats. I don't know why we didn't do that in play-in. That would be my only other call out on the stuff so far. Because
Yeah.
we had to watch Fly PSG again and Gam Fnatic.
Fnatic, Gam again. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think both of those teams, I mean, obviously those were qualification matches, but I think
Yeah.
we definitely would have had, or I think I would have had like calling myself out in prior to we talking about TL Fnatic, but I think it would have looked a bit different, if not in terms of results, in terms of just gameplay and approach.
Yeah. I mean, I think what Rain Yorha says, like Rainbow Six Siege, the upper bracket team in the finals gets to pick one of the maps. But I mean, yeah, I think that's like a decent advantage, but there's not really an equivalent in League. So yeah, sadly, we can't really apply it. The closest would just be bans, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, fun. I think I don't know. I don't have a shit ton to say about the format personally. It's just very topical, and I feel like this comes up every time there's a double limb tournament. Like people really hate the lack of upper record advantage, but I do think it's like pretty good. I would be very curious to see like a history of double limb tournaments and how frequently the upper bracket team like loses, because I feel like it's pretty rare, to be honest. Uh, it's felt like the upper bracket team has won, at least in the regional games, um, that happened in like
More
LCK.
often than not.
Yeah,
Yeah.
LCK, LPL like this year, so it could just be recency bias, but I feel like more often than not, the upper bracket team actually wins. So the question is like, is it a statistically significant advantage to be able to lose an extra series, or is League just such a one-sided game that the top team in a region is just so much better? So I have no,
Yeah.
arguably that
I mean,
is not the case. Yeah.
that's what happened last year at MSI, right?
Yeah.
Too, though,
Mm-hmm.
is that JDG, and I mean, I feel like a lot of people weirdly will write it off if it's a certain matchup,
Yeah.
right? So, like, I can see people writing it off if it's specifically Gen.G versus T1 because they're just gonna be like, "Well,
Yeah.
we've seen this before. Gen.G are gonna win." And then last year at MSI, the finals was JDG BLG, right? And even with BLG, like, I thought BLG were really shaky going into that tournament, and
Mm-hmm.
they leveled up throughout,
Yeah.
not even leveled up, but I guess, like, just kind of came into their own, right? Like, you saw what could be with this
Mm-hmm.
roster, um, and but then they ended up facing JDG in the finals and only taking a game, and I think people were kind of like, "We've seen these teams, this is predetermined," so I don't know if that also is affecting, like, people not remembering maybe that literally just last year when we started with this new format that the upper bracket seed did win. Um, they won 3-1 against BLG, and they were, tournament favorites. So
Yes, Rainier had the upper bracket team does get side select for game one currently in the existing format. So that's it doesn't they're the higher seed. That's usually what happens. I also really like the LPL format of side select. It's not used anywhere else in the regional games, where if you're the higher seed, you get side select for 3 games, and you could choose which games you get side select. I don't know why that format isn't used elsewhere, because I think it's really OP. And like I said, I really don't like loser choose side. I think it's a little weird. So yeah, that's my feeling on that. Yeah, I think it'll be really interesting, because I think part of the reason why people are upset is because it does feel like there's so much parity in this tournament right now. Like G2's
mhm.
performing well, and we'll talk about this later. But G2's performing well. Like seed ones for both regions are performing well. TES took Gen to 5 games, right? It's like it feels like there's very high parity across the current like quote unquote top 5. Plus, we're also just like disrespecting TL again, but you know whatever. If you want to include TL, include TL. Um, the so it kind of feels like there's a lot of parity. So maybe it becomes more relevant, like how significant the upper bracket advantage is. Yeah, okay. Someone on Reddit said it's currently a 60% win rate for winners side for basically the winners. Okay. I'm assuming what you mean by that, Caldonius, is 60% win rate for the upper bracket person. It's a little bit unclear what you're saying, but
that would prove everyone's ire correct if it was for the loser side. I
yeah,
feel
yeah,
so. Probably is winners.
yeah. I mean, just the way he worded it, it could also just be like for the winner's side chooser or something like that. So we could see. But yeah, I think that's an interesting one. I think side select is actually really OP right now because apparently it's impossible to choose winning lanes on red, allegedly. So yeah. Also in theory with lane swaps, having like a red side gets nerfed because you can't get like super hard lane counters, but apparently you can't get them anyways, so it's chill. Um, this is me being facetious because red side drafts have sucked for like the past month. Yes. So
I was gonna say that's not an MSI thing. That's
yeah. That's a I don't
that's
know
a
why.
late spring thing.
It's a very strange thing. But yeah, it's definitely one of those. I think so it would be great if we transitioned into the parody conversation right now, but we're not. We're gonna talk about champions instead. Woo! Awesome.
Let's go.
So yeah, I think like the one that stands out the most is just the fact that Lucian is a 75% win rate at MSI. And this is not just
Mm-hmm.
like LPL CK Lucians. Obviously, like Jan had great games on the Lucian. You actually saw the one game Fnatic won in the TL Fnatic series. Noah played Lucian. Um, though I think you can argue that Talia was also OP in that game. But I think so for me, it's like, what do you think are the most OP champs at MSI currently that have just been like unexpected for you in terms of just really strong or champs that have unbelievably high prio?
I'll say this. It's not, I don't think she's unbelievably strong, but I
Mm-hmm.
am surprised looking at like the win rate totals
Mm-hmm.
that Vayne is sitting at an 80% win
Yeah,
rate.
that one's on a
Um,
list for me as well. Yeah, it's interesting.
yeah, only because, so like we talked about, or you just brought up how lane swaps really changes the way you look
Mm-hmm.
at hard lane encounters, right? But then I remember in a game where I messaged you and I was like, I'm not sure if I like the Vayne here. It was Bin's first game on it, I think.
Yeah.
Into the PSG Ash Ezreal comp. And you made the point that, I mean, Vayne is such a strong side lane duelist that if you are playing side lanes, and what BLG did to funnel gold into Bin, which was essentially allowing the free top side and then sacking grubs, was really smart. But then BLG didn't play side lanes
Yeah.
with it. Um, so I thought that was really interesting, only because like considering everything with the swap, considering how the champ works, it has been cool to see the way that teams have gotten her
Mm-hmm.
um through a lane swap, and like specifically that BLG example. I also thought it was what Keen on Gen G. I thought they played around the Vayne really well. Um so that is a surprising one to me. Let
Yeah.
me see. Looking at the list, I'm not super shocked about Lucian Nami. I think the only thing that not surprised me, but like I remember talking to Jan in season because he was such a a
Yeah.
really strong, like, Lucian defender to the
Yep.
point where he's like, "Shut the fuck up" to the NA community who was just saying, like, "Stop playing it." Specifically after a game where, like, it was literally a very minute, like, trade mistake, where if he had come out and gotten first blood instead of his opponent, that lane actually probably would have looked different. Um, and I already thought that TL were the best team in NA at actually understanding, like, what Lucian does in terms of rotating him around the map to take turrets almost in a more like, obviously, he has a with culling, he has a lot more, like, kill pressure as well, even when he's attacking a turret, but, kind of similar to, like, super, super old school Caitlyn, where, like, the idea is that you are just pressuring towers all the time, right? And
Mhm.
you're rotating the Lucian around the map to take turrets. I thought TL were already the best team in the West at understanding, like, how that worked and trying to execute it. And even though we didn't necessarily see that execution fully come to fruition in NA, I definitely thought we saw it in their series against Fnatic, which was just really cool to see. And specifically really cool for Jan, who again had kind of been going toe to toe with the the NA community who were telling him to stop playing it because, you know, Western EDCs can't play it, et cetera, et cetera,
Mhm.
et cetera. Um, let's see what else.
And I think the thing
Yeah, I mean, I think
that's
I think the most surprising one is Vayne for me, but Lucian is super interesting, if only because it's been really cool to see teams executing it well,
Mhm.
because that's always gonna be interesting to me.
So I think the thing that's interesting about Lucian is for me it's the Nami that's suddenly like super OP and not the Lucian because Nami lane sustain is like very oppressive in the sense that like you are now losing a lot of trades when Nami has full combo that you would have been winning before, and not because she has more damage because her damage got nerfed, but because like you can't push them out of lane anymore. And then I think the other element about the Lucian is like we are playing like these very fast map states where because you're lane swapping so much because you're doing these things, it's very easy to catch someone out, right? It's very easy to like tempo trap. It's very easy to do these things because you're constantly changing lane assignments. You're constantly doing these things.
Mhm.
So I think that like that also gives Lucian more value. And it's like if someone's like walking into fog, they probably die to Lucian, right? And then if you're keeping good side lane pressure up, probably die to Lucian. For me, the reason why the Vayne is so successful is because Vayne and TF are like kind of similar in the lane swap meta where they're sort of in a way get out of jail free range champs. I think almost any range champ where that has like decent utility plus can like build static shiv is fine in a lane swap because your build is pretty cheap, cost effective. I would say like if Vayne gets an item like her silver bolt, she's still really useful. TF, if he gets denied, he just has gold card, which is like a stun that's up very frequently. um, and then you saw like actually the first time I saw a team do the dual lane mid kind of adaptation where top and mid like split the XP was actually Estral. Um, and then obviously Genji did it against TS this week. So and
Mhm.
they did that with TF. And the reason why I think they could get away with it is because it was against Akali in particular, and Akali wasn't gonna like punish you for having XP disadvantage on your mid laner early on. So I think like you can find creative ways to get XP, and if you get just like a little bit of gold on those champs, they're actually still really useful. Like with side pressure, with utility on their kit, with the damage numbers. So I actually think Vayne like doesn't really mind being in a lane swap scenario that much. I
Mhm.
also think with like turrets like dropping faster, you have more scenarios like the one you mentioned in the BLG scenario where you have like the wave in like a freeze angle. I know LS is like finally popping off, you know, somewhere far away. But you actually have like map states where you can freeze now when it wasn't like not usually it was rarely viable or rarely advantageous because like you're taking tier 1 so fast that top laners can just chill without like any
Yeah.
major terrible things happening, and freeze after like an early game. So I think that that's also part of why like Vayne, TF are sort of chilling. Um, but yeah, I think it's interesting because like you think lane swap and you're like, oh, we must have Ornn, we must have Cassante, we must have Zac. But if you're not putting yourself in a position where you're getting dove, or where you have to like survive, or where you're supposed to be like super low econ, like there are a lot of surprising situations, surprising champs that can get away with like being lane swap top winners. Um, the other, I guess for me, the big one is Ornn. That's like the most surprising one. But it also makes sense because if you're playing like long range comps or any comps, like Ornn's engage is ridiculous. Ornn
Hmm.
has ridiculously high win rates. Um, Champs I'm surprised have relatively low win rates because they feel so oppressive are like Talia, Zinzao. Zinzao's win rate is obviously like over 52%, but every time he's in a game, it feels like, I guess we just can't play team fights because he'll nullify half our damage. And Talia is just like still so good, specifically versus Kalista. Um, but it's like always mind-numbingly boggling to me that people will like still first pick Kalista with Poppy and Talia up. I'm just like, what the fuck are you guys doing?
Yeah.
This champ can't play this game. And there have been a lot of situations where that's happened, like the T1 G2 series where they were like prioing Poppy. I was like, there's no way they first pick Kalista again. I think I was like watching it with Thinkard at the time, and he was like convinced it would still be first pick Kalista. It's like they just got Poppy unless they ban Poppy. There's no fucking way you're first picking Kalista again, right? Um, so yeah, it's an interesting. And then they like self ban the Kalista. So it's like it's definitely interesting that these are champions being picked like this. So fun times. But yeah, I feel like the best champs are useful like bounty hunter style champs. You know, have any Dota references in the chat? Bounty hunter is basically
I
just
didn't get
like
it.
run around the map. Don't farm, but like run around the map, and if you get kills, then you're a champion that functions. If you're a hero that functions. If you don't get kills, then good luck, God bless. So
Nice.
yeah. Um, cool. Anything else on like meta champions?
No, I mean, I think I am really glad that we have, and obviously I'm sure we'll talk more about this with G2.
Mm-hmm.
Um but I am really glad that we are starting to see some really good, like I'm glad that we're starting to see teams recognize really strong answers to the Callista. Um be that just swapping away from it and then swapping back, like essentially doing the level 3 like 5-minute swap, um or by picking stuff like the Poppy, like the Talia, where you can just kind of completely fuck her over.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is a good evolution to see, not because I hate Callista, but just because
I do. I
I
hate
feel like
lethality Callista. Why does this? Why are people building serrated Derek on Callista? Please stop. Anyway.
I don't hate Callista, but I do think that for a while teams kind of just like I think a lot of this happens a lot of times, especially in like region by region,
Mhm.
where you kind of just settle on the fact that certain picks are OP and everyone just starts kind of trading them rather than
Yeah.
trying to find concrete answers. And so I'm glad that we already have teams coming up with really good concrete answers.
All right. Well, there's also been a narrative floating around that's been like, oh, their prep was just bad, right? Like this idea that if your prep is bad and you're disrespecting your opponent, that's the reason why you're winning, why you're losing. I think the specific reference to this I saw was like the fact that Fnatic opened ASOL
Hmm.
for the game, but there's been like a lot like that where it's like you could tell their picks and bans like they haven't been studying their opponent, they disrespected them, like stuff like this. It's been a very prevalent narrative. Have you felt like in particular there have been series that are extremely, let's say, like underprepared for, or the drafts are just not showing good concept of studying the opponent team this MSI?
I haven't. So like the main like disrespect I felt was probably mostly in the BLG PSG series,
Mm-hmm.
and that was not surprising to me because I've seen BLG do this against LPL teams that they also don't think are as good as they are. So like I wasn't surprised it happened. And that was less about draft and more just about like execution
Mm-hmm.
and overextensions and stuff like that. Um I think they came out in the T1 series and really proved what they can do when they prepare, right? So, I don't know if that actually might prove the narrative because I also don't think they probably
Sure.
I'll just say I think they clearly prepped for T1, and I can't say the same thing about PSG, right? Um,
I don't know if it's that or as if they just don't know how to play against Azel.
they
Very
could also be
like.
that. Maple's chant pool just gives them hives. I don't know. But like, I think, yeah, I I'm not sure, but I do know that like apparently in a post-game interview, one of the Fnatic players said that they felt like they didn't have to prepare for TL.
Mm-hmm.
Which if that's I don't know who the player was. I honestly forget. I try to avoid Reddit just for my own mental health because I don't want to spiral if someone
Sure.
makes a hate thread about me. I don't know. But like the interesting thing was that a couple or like when FlyQuest was like going out, I'm pretty sure it was Jensen who said he felt like their prep hadn't been good or like they didn't prepare as much as they
Yeah.
could have.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in particular for like Western teams specifically, because you're already going into a lot of these tournaments knowing that the level of play is significantly higher in the LPL and LCK. And I feel like a team that does this pretty well actually is G2 in terms of like when they go to internationals, despite the fact that um, their practice in Europe is not going to be as strong as the practice they'll receive from scrimming LPL and LCK teams once they get here. I feel like they do put in a lot of research in terms of like researching their opponents. And I think it's pretty clear both in the way that they draft for themselves and who they're drafting against. Um, but yeah, like to hear that back to back from FlyQuest and then Fnatic players is kind of disheartening because
Yeah.
I do feel like if you like it's not like these teams obviously there is a discrepancy in terms of the quality of practice you're going to get,
Yep.
right?
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about solo queue differences, we've talked about regional differences. However, it seems like if you are not putting in time to prepare for an opponent, even if it seems based on their regional performance as compared to yours, like an insurmountable opponent,
Yeah.
I feel like that's still so infuriating to me because if you don't prep, it's like you're admitting this is insurmountable, this is impossible, and I just don't like that attitude.
Sure.
I don't know if that's mean to say, but like, and I don't even know if this is the narrative because I haven't seen uh, a lot of what the narrative is. But I'm not, I'm not sure if better prep always wins. But I feel like, especially if you're going up against a team that you know is playing in a more difficult region regularly and you think is better than you, preparation is not going to hurt you, so you should probably fucking do it.
But I won't get to try Mala Shango if I do it. Anyway, Azel. I mean, I guess like for me, the examples that people use are just really weird. Like the ASOL game where they opened ASOL, they were consistently banning it, right? And then game three, they decide they need to open something and they want to ban Lucian because the Lucian has been surprising and they were able to pick it in the second game first pick, but like if they're on red side, they can't do it. So they decided to ban the Lucian, which was the main adaptation, right? And then they um, ended up in a situation where they also wanted to ban Talia because they wanted to prio Callista. Yeah. So from that perspective, it's like, okay, we're not like necessarily disrespecting them. We're identifying which champ we think is going to be more frustrating for our comp, and we're opening ASOL because we think it's like the most likely for us to be able to play against it. And I don't know if that's disrespect. I think that's just kind of in the moment they had to open a ban. This is what they decided to do, right? So yeah, I don't know. To me, that's like not lack of prep. That's just like this is the decision I'm making at this time. Though I do like making jokes about like, oh, my coaches stayed up all night. It's like, okay, it sounds like they crammed instead of preparing properly, you know. But I mean, I also don't think it's the end of the world if maybe unpopular opinion, but I don't think it's the end of the world if you are like super cocky going into a series and you don't prep and you lose. Like, it's not the end of the world because it's like that's entertainment, you know? That's fun. And that's at the end of the day, that is your job. Your job is not to
God.
win MSI. Your job is to entertain your audience.
Oh
So,
my god.
realistically speaking, if you're like, nah, TL are fucking shit, we don't have to prep, and then you show up on the day and get completely stomped, then that's funny as fuck. Anyway, and you get a lot of fan engagement doing that too. So, uh,
Oh my god.
go for it. You know, go off, guys. You know, just remember that that's why. Sorry, Bubba's City wasn't that
I
fun.
think it's funny just because I would love just knowing you and me, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Like, go back and take some of our takes now and play them to like 2014 Kelsey and Emily,
Yeah.
and I would just be like, how dare you. Like, you are wrong. Here's my anyway.
Yeah, I mean,
Uh
I will say I definitely took League as a competition like super seriously compared to League as a business, I would say, the way I do now. So that's fair. Um, but I mean, that's not to say that when I coach, I'm not like super focused on the competitive aspect because it's generally what I'm supposed to do because people don't want to see a coach on camera anyway. They don't give a fuck. So, um, yeah, there you go. But I tell my players to go on camera. They do that. All right, good, fun shit. Let's go. Next. So speaking of, I think like we have to have this. Speaking of conversations we've had since 2014,
yeah.
uh, the regional thing comes up all the time, right? Like
Yep.
LCK better than LPL, NA greater than EU greater than NA, etc. And I think you and I have always kind of had the stance of like, I really wish people would talk more about the teams as like their
Mm-hmm.
unique identities rather than their regional identities. Um, and definitely, like, I think that's another opinion that I've kind of softened on over time because I do acknowledge that regional rivalries like generate hype, right, and excitement, and
Yeah.
people get super into them. Uh, but also, this is an MSI where it feels like there's actually a lot of parity. Um,
Yeah.
so I think that we should take time to celebrate that because it's like super cool. Like Seed One beat Seed Two for LPL LCK. Like TL beat Fnatic. G2 is looking super insane. The Seed Ones are all in top six for the major regions. So like all of that for me is like super exciting. Like even PSG Seed One beating Seed Two NA is like part of it, right? And then losing, and then of course like they lost out, but like I think it's cool that the Seed Ones are winning because it demonstrates like a good level of competitiveness for like your top teams. So that's like the
Yeah.
this is like as close to the like regional parity tournament that I think Riot have ever wanted so far, right? So from that perspective, I think it's very interesting time at the moment.
Yeah. I also do like that because there's so much parity, it really does force you to talk about like how teams match up against each other. Like it's kind of both, right? Because obviously you brought up the fact that previously you'd be a lot more focused on being like, I don't understand why people won't talk about how teams match up against each other
Mm-hmm.
instead of their regions. But now that we do have all number one seeds in top six, like I do think it's the thing that we have to do now is actually talk about like
Yeah.
how does this team stylistically match up, especially with some of the matchups coming up,
Mm-hmm.
like BLG, Gen G, and TES G2 in particular are like going to be heavily based on draft and who ends up being able to kind of enact their specific play style, um, which I think is super, super interesting to talk about. Uh,
Subscribe to twitch.tv slash
I
Taylor
also
and Moser. You
think
can enjoy all the Kelsey
the
Moser LPL content you could ever want. Subscribe now.
the
Twitch.tv
big
slash
thing
Taylor and
with
Moser.
TL Fnatic, I don't know if this is where my making the rounds public apology to TL comes, because I obviously did the one on camera and then also tweeted out my apology to TL, because I think a lot of people may have been wondering like why I favored Fnatic going into that matchup. And I think it's very similar to why I erroneously, by the way, so maybe I should have already learned my lesson, but picked 100 Thieves to beat TL in
Mm-hmm.
playoffs. Um, and that was because I felt like if they could have a really strong early game and make things very chaotic, I felt like at that time TL really did not deal with that well. And something that we saw from Team Liquid throughout the playoffs is that when teams did do that to them, they were just like, "Okay, we'll go toe to toe with you," right? Like we
Mm-hmm.
will just have an insane combined kills per minute, and like set records and kind of bash our heads together. And I think that was another thing that I underestimated from TL after the TES series, because I just thought TES did a lot of smart things to shut down TL in that series, but also I thought TL looked a little bit lost in the face of what top
Mm-hmm.
esports was able to do. And I wasn't sure going into the Fnatic series if Fnatic just came out like if Humanoid and Razork were playing really, really well, if Jun was able to play well, because going into that matchup, I was like, well, Yon and Core, I think are a better bot lane duo. But if I'm looking at who's performing better, I think June right now is performing better than Core, and Yon is performing better than Noah. So I was like, it depends on how that bot lane is going to kind of swing. And obviously, it swung heavily in favor of FTL. I also think the other thing I will say I underestimated from Team Liquid going into that Fnatic matchup is just, and this obviously comes from Spawn, it comes from the rest of their coaching staff, right? But the fact that they were so easily able to not only regroup, but like address some of the mistakes they did make in the top esports series and apply them to going up against Fnatic, I thought was really, really smart. Um, and in that way, I probably underestimated their coaching staff in that regard, right? So, but if people were wondering like why I picked Fnatic, it was because I was thinking it was a very similar analysis to what I thought of 100 Thieves when TL beat 100 Thieves. So again, maybe I should have just learned my lesson. But I was like, I think Fnatic can make it chaotic enough that then they win out in like smaller skirmishes. Um, but that's obviously not what happened at all. And shout out to specifically, I think the team is playing. I know Spawn had talked about how he really wanted to open up APA like not his like obviously part of it is his champ pool, and I think it's both like he's both playing better and it's just a really good meta for someone like APA. But I also think they as a team are really using him so much better and playing around him so much better. He
Yeah.
seems so much more a huge part of the team and how it works than last year, which I think is a major, major difference in this team when you compare them from last year to now.
Yeah, I guess for me the big thing, if we're talking about like champion picks and adaptations, the biggest thing that I am not super happy to see still is Ari for APA. But I think in general it works well. Like the idea of Ari I get, because it's like it's not the same kind of you have to like trade heavily for prio, and you don't get free rotations around the map. You have to use like DMAT and your pots like at a good timing to get rotations and then have like map impact. Whereas like Talia, it's like you throw your Q out, you brain off, hit an R button, and then you're in someone else's lane. But I guess like for me the there is like different, but it has like the same utility as like a Talia, which is like map pressure, rotating to fights first, like these types of ideas. So I get why they play it. Like Tristana can also do the same thing, because Tristana gets prio in like almost every matchup. Highly mobile, pretty safe champ, right? So I think that those are like all champs that like if they're playing around like how APA plays, it makes sense that he's playing them. But the Ari was like one of his most played in playoffs, but it was also not great. Like compared to the Talia, where it felt like he was winning almost every Talia game. So yeah, I do like they have like the idea of like how APA functions in the team down well. So I do enjoy that aspect of it. So I think it'll be fun for sure. I think the TL thing that's very fun for me, because I wrote the article about them for the TL websites, which is
Fun, go read it.
Like the fun thing for me is like they completely flipped how they wanted to approach dragon stacking, which was very much like, okay, we're always going to get first Drake. That remained consistent, but we're always going to get second Drake now too, because we're going to use it as an excuse to fight. And that felt like a huge difference in how they were playing, which was we're playing Drake so that we can opt out of fights, versus we're playing for first Drake so that we can take every subsequent fight. And I think that makes them like a better matchup into Fnatic, but the continuous underrating of TL's ability to, I think, take those fights successfully is a big problem in terms of like analysis, because I think people are overrating mechanical execution way more than terrain control and taking a fight on your terms, I think, which TL are almost always in a position on the map to take fights that they want. They're almost never like caught. They're almost never griefing, and I think the setup of a fight is very de-emphasized in how people analyze them, and I think it's something that TL do very well, which is allowing them to win so many fights. And when people say things like, but like we can't out mechanics X team, like they're ignoring how TL get into position to take the fights, and that's what's helping them win. Because I also predicted Fnatic to win this one, but spoiler, of the last 4 matches played, I got the winner of 1 correct, so doesn't fucking mean anything. Because I did all of my predictions in a bracket beforehand, so my bracket's completely fucked. But you know, that is what it is.
Yeah, I think my predictions have been pretty bad too. I also think to that point, that's something that when I try to, I've gotten into, and if Chronicler and Raz are still in chat, I don't know if they are, but if they are, they can attest to this. I've gotten into so many like small arguments defending top esports, because for people that don't know, me with BLG and TES, it's like that Gordon Ramsay meme where it's like, oh, you're so gorgeous with TES, and then with BLG, it's like, you fucking donkey. Like that is that is me with these two teams. Even though I obviously love them both very much, but I think the super underrated thing about top esports sometimes is something very similar, where it's like you could see it even in some of the Gen G losses where they positioned themselves for a fight even when they were behind and even when they had made several mistakes prior and Gen G were in like a very commanding lead, they would still occasionally be able to get some really good setups for team fights. And I think it's something that is a little bit underrated when we talk about them being a smart team and like why they're a smart team. And it's also something that is, I think, it is interesting because I know for me specifically, it really challenges like what I am analyzing in the game, right? So,
Yeah.
and I think it is something that can't just be defined as, well, TL are gonna lose because they don't have hands, or
Mhm.
well, TES only win because Jackie Love is the best ADC right now. And it's like, well, no, I don't think either of those are good analysis of either team.
I think to an extent, when my biases come in, it has to know with what certain regions or teams are known for. Like, for example, TS is known for illogically running around the map like idiots and trying to out mechanic everyone, because that's historically what they've been until Mako joined the team, right? And then suddenly, like, they are a macro team, but it's like they have those elements. So if the region's reputation is we're going to take fights everywhere, we're like everything we do is we scrap and we run people down and we play really hard for laning phase and we're gonna kill you at your jungle in your jungle and things like this, then I'm like very impressed when you can also play the map, right? Um, that's like when I'll like super overrate, because like for me the RNG MSI that they won with like Xiaohu top, I was like, of course this team is gonna win MSI because not only are they like an LPL team, but they're an LPL team that's good at macro, you know? It's one of those things. Whereas if it's like Team Liquid and they're doing rotations and these types of things, it's like, well, what else do you got? You know? Like, what's wrong with you? Like, this type of shit.
Oh my god. So we both are like, you're gorgeous, TES.
Exactly. The TS bias
Oh
is
god.
strong. Yeah.
This is too big of a top esports bias over here.
Yeah, it's bad though because I have insane bin bias though. Like I've been trying to say that bin is like super good for all split, and I was genuinely actually just surprised that 369 won top all pro. But I do think that also has to do with like the bias for like laning phase versus um just like what you're doing in fights, right?
Mhm.
And like for example, I have Jackie Love over Elk, despite the fact that Elk is like winning every 2v2, and I have been over 369 right in my player rankings. So I think that that's like kind of demonstrates I don't like I've kind of come full circle where laning phase matters less to me, and it's like if you can out like you always have the option in your back pocket of winning through just out macroing them. You almost always have that option in your back pocket, and I think now more than it ever has been since last time lane swaps exist, that's very true, right? That's actually
Yeah.
just absurdly true in the game. That's also part of why I am more excited to watch the game now, because it feels like there's more variety in how you can win currently than there has been in League for the past like I don't know 5 years. So yeah, it's an enjoyable time for me at the moment.
Yeah, same. I also just think it's with lane swaps, obviously, I forget who said this. It's either coach or player that I was talking to or someone else was talking to. Wow, my brain has vacated the premises. But they basically said that where uh standard lanes is a lot more like mechanically driven, the addition of lane swaps essentially turns it into a chess match, right? Because it not only matters like what you drafted in relation to the swap, but also how you are swapping, what you are either hoping to accomplish from swapping and how you're approaching that, and also how your opponents are responding to it. Which is all like super fucking interesting to me. So like that's why I've been really enjoying lane swaps, just because you get to see how teams are evolving in terms of the way that they think about specifically like wave management and also like XP like experience difference is really fascinating.
Yep. And I think that that's for me why, like, even if the matchups don't indicate that you should lane swap in theory, like maybe you don't have a fast push AD, maybe you're fine in the 2v2. If you think that your advantage is I can play the wave and the rotation's better, then you should still swap, right? That's kind of like how I feel. And I think that there's a lot of situations where people will be kind of like puzzled by why did they swap there, and that's like, well, that's why. So yeah, I think it makes sense. So yeah, it's been super fun for me. I think in order to celebrate the exciting parity that is occurring, we will just do something really boring and go through the bracket. And then if we have
this is the original making the rounds concept, though, for people that think this is boring. Literally, this is what the show was.
Yeah, this is what it used to be. I did have a TES sequence, but now I feel like we glazed TES too hard, and I don't want to go over the TES sequence anymore. So.
Well, also, there's no guarantee that I'll be able to like watch it, because even in this time, you've cut out twice. And then my internet has done that thing where it just speeds your voice up. So it's like, there's like dead silence, and I get terrified that I dropped out. And then I hear you talking really, really fast, and then it like catches up.
Oh, I'm glad that it doesn't skip me for you. It just speeds
you up. No, it just speeds you up. It's very bizarre.
That's fantastic, actually. All right. We'll just do this. Okay. Oh. Apparently, I already have a scene called Bracket anything. Anyway, Bracket 2 it is. Okay, there we go. Yeah, okay, cool. Bracket. I think so basically, like, we'll just go through. This is the current existing bracket. I'm using this. I tried to make it darker so it doesn't flashbang everyone, because most people complain about that. And I don't, because I'm old. And I don't care about dark mode. So, but we'll talk about basically the matchups and like how we think they'll go more than we'll actually put any numbers down. But effectively, the next matchups I think are lower bracket matchups. Even if they're not, we're starting with lower bracket because elimination is important. So yeah, I guess like first on the docket is T1 TL. We've basically just talked about the systematic underrating of Team Liquid. So tell me how they're gonna win this one, Emily.
So I don't think they're gonna win this one, but
just fucking
yeah. I do think that what I'm actually going to do is talk about oh my gosh, BLG's approach to T1, because I did think that they really understood what they wanted to do against this team. They adopted a specific ban strategy that you and I actually talked about way earlier in the season, after I think the first time Gen G and T1 met, and you were like, why does, like, you know, facetiously, so we could talk about it, you're like, why does Gen G always beat T1? It just has a lot to do with the way that they play around mid lane, and also the way that they attack Faker. So essentially, the Gen G ban strategy playbook is to just constantly ban Azir, Ori, and then Ashe. The Ashe is for Keria, not for Faker. The other two are obviously for Faker. Because on those champions, he just performs way better, and they also facilitate his absolute best qualities, which is his understanding of the map, right? So I thought, looking at BLG's strategy, right? Guess what? Every single game they're on blue side, the first bans are Azir, Ori, and Ashe. Yeah. And the most interesting thing was that they did end up dropping the Ashe ban specifically in game 4. And they decided just to full target ban Faker with 5 mid lane bans coming through. So basically, the interesting thing about going up against BLG specifically, which we already talked about doesn't necessarily apply to TL, is that you have to essentially ban or pick Ari away from Knight. Otherwise, he will just absolutely smoke you on that champion. So that's obviously not something that I think TL maybe want to adopt. But I do think that what Faker can do for T1, despite the fact that he's obviously had, like, for people that didn't watch him in LCK, it was like shades of kind of classic Faker, right? He had a very, very strong split. And him not having as strong of a tournament does not negate the fact that he had a really strong split. But I do think also coming to this tournament, teams have done a better job, specifically in that BLG series, of really, really attacking him in the mid lane. And then also he's made some uncharacteristic errors when pressured. So I think if TL want to have a chance, they do have to find something for APA that has mid prio, and they also have to adopt a similar target strategy that we've seen Gen.G do against T1, and that we've now seen BLG execute really well in their most recent series against T1, right? So I think that's the first thing. If they're to have a chance, I still think it's going to be a little bit rough for them, provided that T1 kind of have the same attention to detail that they had in regular season, and even in some of the series we've seen them have here. Obviously, yeah, I just think it's really difficult to still, like, in my head, it's still going to be really difficult for them to beat T1. But we'll see. So I have called this a 3-1 for T1. I don't think it's as insurmountable as like people being like, just unplug their keyboards, which is always kind of the cop-out answer. Yeah. But I do think the things I would like to see from TL and the things I expect to see from TL, because we've talked about how good this team is at preparation, I think they'll enact probably a very similar ban strategy, and then take it from there.
So what you're saying is there's going to be 10 mid bans in one of the games this series, because
oh god, that'd be so funny, because
APA's pool and still
yeah, ASOL to like, so the bans we have are coming across
it's because
are like
ASOL's not good, right? So you'll want to deny the ASOL.
ASOL to Leah. So it's like if TL are on blue side, it's like they go Azir or Ashe, and then T1 respond with ASOL to Leah, what, Trist?
Yeah, maybe and leave the for fun. Leave the Ziggs
out. Yeah, like they target ban if they want, but like maybe leave that open, because TL have obviously felt like they don't have to pick it. So yeah.
Yeah, somehow we end up with like he's gonna pull out, like, APA is gonna pull out the Kled. Like, if we get low enough in the trap pool, the Kled's gonna come out. That used to be one of his signature picks, was the Kled, so I'm down. I'm here for it, man.
God.
Let's go.
Well, now if it comes out, well, we can be like, oh, Kelsey called it. There's 5 mid-lane bans. APA is playing Kled.
APA Kled, let's go. I think I am... Okay, so here's my joke answer, which is what they need to do is they need to like call up HLE and be like, bro, what's Doran doing right now? And then just like have him on stage in Impact's chair and see if Zeus reacts, you know? And then like when the game starts, obviously Impact is playing, but just have Doran on stage, just like there.
Oh my god. That's an amazing answer, actually.
just see if there's anything. But yeah, I think the main thing for me is gonna be like the mid target I think is very relevant for T1, not because Faker is like necessarily the best player on the team, but because he just has so much pressure in the way that he plays. He controls the map for them extremely well. So I think that that's like a huge thing to kind of echo what you said. I think the other factor is just like how they're able to pressure mistakes, and there are still like a lot of random mistakes from TL, like we talked about in the Fly series. So it was like one weird flash and their perma chain ganking Whippo, right? So just like mitigate those, because we still see a lot of like random shit happening in TL games. um, and then I think just in general, like the Drake fights, I think are good because I've seen a few mistakes from T1. I actually wrote down this from the series where it was like they actually messed up like quite a few retakes in the BLG series, and like face checked into like they didn't retake their weak side before transitioning into BLG's strong side, and then got flanked on like at least 3 times in the BLG series. So I think that that's something where it's like if TL are smart on their rotations, and like T1 are not always like cleaning out their weak side wards, Impact's like very good at flanks. Like I would always like scout when on EG whenever we would play like versus FlyQuest, which Impact was on FlyQuest at the time. I would always like scout TP positions from base, because Impact like looks at like is very good at finding those flank angles where you think he's just backing, or you think he's gonna go to his back to his lane, but he's finding like super good flank angles. So I think stuff like that is like maybe an angle. Um, I am gonna say T1 3-0, but yeah, we can split the difference on 3-1 for our special brackets. Okay, we'll split the difference. This is very impressive difference splitting. So
we can't do half a game, though. You know.
Yeah, the difference, the disrespect of TL continues. You know, the disrespect of TL continues rampantly on the show apparently. So TES G2 would be the next one. What do we think? This one could potentially be very fun.
Yeah, I think this one is super interesting because for me, it depends heavily on if TES draft against G2 like they are G2 specifically, or like they are a generically good team. Because I actually think no, hear me out. I know that sounds really fucking stupid.
It makes sense. Yeah.
But it's basically like I actually feel like you can leave picks up even on red side, like Lucian against G2, provided that you ban stuff like Poppy and Zac and stuff that G2 uses really, really well, right? Because I think if I am Jackie Love and Mako, I can let Hans and Mickey have Lucian Nami and play something else into it. So I think that's the first step, because I think TES will do a lot better if they literally just focus way more on target bans than things that are like generically good. I think the big interesting thing to me is something that was kind of similarly interesting to me with TES going up against Gen G, where I was saying how Gen G, I think, have a stronger, like I give Gen G, as you know, Kelsey, because you say too much credit. I say maybe I'm a Gen G glazer, who knows. I think their mid game is really smart though. And I do think that is where they can beat out TES. And I also think very similarly, G2's map movements can be so incredibly smart. They can have such really, really smart approaches to their lane assignments, where they can apply pressure, how they can leverage if someone does get caught out cross map. They usually end up leveraging a lot of those plays. even if they end up falling behind early. Obviously, I don't think we saw as much of this in the PSG series as we did in their other series, specifically their T1 series, and then also just in their domestic performance. And I think it's going to be a bit of a similar matchup to the top esports Gen G series in that fashion. However, I think the interesting difference is going to come in team fights, and that's where the draft really is super important to me, because I think on their comfort picks, especially if like Mickey ends up getting Poppy or BB ends up getting Zach or something like that, I think G2 have a much better understanding of positioning in team fights and like where they need to be and where their setups are, especially if they have the long range engage from the Zach. They're really good at playing around that. But if TES target bans, I see them doing better in team fights and also potentially better in the early game. So that it's a really, really interesting matchup.
Yeah.
This and BLG Genji are actually so hard for me to call because of the team's play styles.
So I think it's interesting because TS and G2 have like very similar domestic reputations, which is like sometimes, well, I guess TS's domestic reputation is that their early game is good. My analysis of TS domestically is that their early game is really weird. And you said you felt like Genji beat T1 in the mid game, but I feel like there were just like so many games where every single lane was like down 1k except for bot. In the early game, and Genji actually just beat them in the early game. But I think especially mid was a problem. Just Chovy things, I
in
guess.
the T series.
Yeah, in the TS Gen series, because I don't think actually GN beat them out in the game. I think Genji just like they tried to cheese the lane swap in game 5, and it went really terribly for them. TS did, and then in game 1, it was like they had a really terrible lane swap reaction to the like top mid XP share.
Yeah.
They had a really bad reaction to that. So I think that there were like those were 2 very significant leads, and then the game where they played standard, I think they just got completely blown the fuck out. So in every lane but bots. Whereas like G2 also has the reputation of like now teams are scouting Yike very well, so they can't get like the early pressure into invade for free anymore domestically, and so their mid game is like really what's carrying them, I think, is the reputation. And then of course like I've already talked about TES mid game being strong, so I think they actually match up very interestingly just because of those factors. I also think I think mid will be an issue for TES.
Yeah.
100%. I think mid will be an issue. Not because I think Cream is bad. Like, Cream had some really great moments against Genji, and most people would argue Chovy is like the best mid in the world, right? So I think that, like, but there were also just games where he was terrible, and it's like normal like international inexperience inconsistencies, right? So it's not necessarily his fault. The other problem was top was an issue. I don't necessarily think Broken Blade's gonna smash or anything, but Broken Blade finds like really good angles on champs like Zach. Like, Zach has a really weirdly low win rate at MSI, but I think most of the wins are BB because there are just a lot of situations where like he forces turns when they're coming late to objectives. He forces turns really well. Like, I think they would actually match up really well against TL, like G2 would, because when TL set up early, like G2 get like very good flank angles, collapse extremely well, are super good at retakes. Like, FlyQuest like specialized in retakes, but we're not as good at them. So I think that that's where I see like that matchup would be very super interesting to me. So I think we'll see. I don't know. It's like hard for me to say because I feel like TES just rotate around their bot lane extremely well and play around their bot lane extremely well. But I do think like Caps has been playing really well, and I think that G2 can get an advantage in sides with their solo lanes. And I think if TS can't get an advantage in sides, they lose. So I think this could be potentially a 5-game series.
Yeah.
I will slightly favor TES because I'm biased, and we've already expressed that I'm biased. But I do think there's like a very realistic chance for G2 to win this one.
Yeah. I also think BB has had a really good tournament in terms of like just G2 facilitating him and his unique champion pool and what he can do on champions. Again, like the Zach with super long range engage. I think his team fighting with that champion is actually so good. But the other factor that I think is kind of interesting is I think TN has not been nearly as bad as people think he has, but I also think he needs to be on something like the Maokai or the Sedge to help facilitate his lanes. And then I also think unfortunately my boy, we already touched upon this, but my boy 369 is having a bad tournament. Like I think you already had talked about Bin versus 369 like domestically and how that is an argument, but regardless of what side you ended up on that, I think everyone has to agree that like 369 is actually having a very uncharacteristically bad tournament. He's messed up specifically where I think it's really concerning is not in lane or like response to swaps or anything like that, but in his actual teamfight targeting and teamfight prowess, I think he's looked more lost than I remember seeing him in a really long time, which is very concerning because that's like what he is known for, right? And in talking about Bin's improvements in comparison, just because I think everyone is always going to compare these two top laners side by side for a lot of reasons. I think Bin has performed exceptionally well in those types of scenarios, right? His understanding of where he needs to be in a team fight in relation to what champion he is, etc. So to see those mistakes from 369 is really rough. And by contrast, it's exciting to see how well G2 are facilitating BB to play things he's super comfortable on. So I think that's also going to be a big factor in the series.
I mean, I'm almost talking myself into predicting G2, but I think the main factor that it comes down to for me is TS are super good at like baiting fights where they act like they have numbers disadvantage, and I think G2 follows for those a lot. Like those types of skirmish sequences. And I think that that's like what TS are actually just the best at, and they will do it every time. So I don't know. That's like my biggest call out is I feel like you'll get a situation where BB or Caps are just like TPing because they think this is a one fight, and then they stall out with like Renata or whatever they're stalling out with, and suddenly the rest of TES collapse because they do that, and it's actually not a numbers advantage fight, and they lose, and then they're also like behind on the map, right? So I don't know, but I do think there's a very realistic chance that we end up like solo lanes have advantage, both teams play really well, like there's juggling side pressure, and G2 just fucking win. Like it could be as simple as that. So. But what should we put down?
So I just literally on my predictions like paper, I can even take a picture of it and tweet it out or something. But I literally wrote down 3-2 and did not assign a team.
Well,
because it's gonna be so close, and also again heavily draft dependent. Because I also feel like if TES have decided just not to do their homework, which they're not usually the type of team to do that, specifically Mako teams are not usually the type of teams to do that, but if they have, and they let stuff like the Poppy through for more than one game, that's going to be really concerning. Well, and then I think it's definitely a G2 win.
Well, I put TS down for the sake of convenience for us to continue to have a
All right.
conversation, but
We are TES Glazers, so
we
it's
are
fine.
which probably means G2 win because we're very TS
Yeah,
biased.
true.
So that probably
True.
actually means G2 win. So, if we're saying it's close and we're TS biased, then probably G2 win. I'm just throwing that
It's
out
a
there.
G2 win. Yep.
All right. Genji, like let's do Genji BLG next. Though we could do T1 TES first.
Yeah, so I'll say this. I think this, because like I have predicted Genji to take it all, and I'm sticking by that. Maybe I'll flip flop after the series, but what I actually think is going to happen is that this is the series that BLG would win, and then Genji will come back in the grand finals.
So you're
essentially, right?
saying
So
that there is an advantage to coming back from the lower bracket.
yes, well, specifically for a team like Genji too, who I think can adjust pretty well. But yeah, this is going to be really, really tough because there were a lot of things that BLG did in their series against T1 that I thought were like really smart. Not only just the target bans, but also the way that they ended up playing the map, the way that they were really able to like track owner and catch him off guard several times. I thought Shun performed really well in the series. I thought On performed like
On's really good,
phenomenally well. Like his glow up. Like I know we talk a lot about Elk performing better since his Jomung days, but like On has just been so good.
I'm the biggest Elk doubter in the history of mankind.
You're
so.
yeah. But I think I do think that BLG in this specific matchup, it depends on. So first of all, I don't want to see either Shun or Canyon lock in Italy. I just want there to be a permanent ban.
Every game.
Go! You just want them to trade Italy?
I think it'll be so
I
fun.
want the opposite. I just want Italy to be like an auto ban. Just take it away from both of them. So
Rafa would be so disappointed to hear this.
He would yell at me. He's an Italy player for people that don't know. He's an Italy gremlin. I think the big thing is in this specific series when they meet each other the first time. So like I said, I'm picking BLG here, but then picking Genji to take it all. I think that BLG come in, they have a really good answer for Canyon, who's actually made some, I'm not going to say uncharacteristic, because I don't necessarily think it's as uncharacteristic as maybe like people would hope it is, but like Canyon has always been a really good pathing jungler, but I also feel like he's always taken risks when it comes to invades. And on this team, obviously with when he has mid prio, he really understands when he can like invade his opponent's jungle most of the time. But I also think he's done a lot of risky plays and been punished for it. And I think BLG, especially given the way they were playing against T1, are going to be very, very on top of that. The biggest deciding matchup in this series, I actually think, interestingly enough, is going to be not Knight versus Chovy, which I think they're probably just going to be fighting over lane prio most of the time. But I think it comes down to me the way whether these teams swap, what they get out of a swap, and how their top laners come out of the swap. Because I think a weirdly underrated aspect still in a lot of Gen G's team fighting and side laning is Keen and his performance. I think he's been performing super well. And alternatively, obviously, Ben's been performing super well. I feel like people are already aware of that. So it comes down to those two specifically in the way that they play side lanes and the way that they set up for team fights. I think that is actually the most I know it's like Chovy versus Knight, everyone's hyped, they're friends, they're the two best mid laners in the world finally facing each other, blah blah blah. But for me, it's Keen versus Ben. That's actually the matchup I'm the most excited about. And they might not even lane against each other early, which is hilarious. But those are like the two players that I'm looking at to be like, if all other things go to chalk, the big difference makers.
So I actually do think mid is going to matter the most. That's just because like both of these teams are so used to just playing like, mid is
around
winning.
mid prio.
Like,
yeah,
of course mid has won. Like, duh. Like, that's just the way the game works. we have a winning mid.
Yeah.
We have prio. We can invade. Duh. No one asks that question because it's just always true. So I think that if like mid goes a certain way or the opposite way, then like you actually did see the impact of when Cream had a good game, right? In the Genji TES series. Like they actually just kind of immediately crumbled. It was fucking crazy. So I think that that's like, to me, that it does actually matter a lot just because those teams don't know how to play when their mid is behind. So if like, unless mid is like dead even, which would be pretty fucking funny, it will end up being
they're exactly in the center of the lane, and no one has prio.
No one is prio, but we could invade, and our mids will rotate at the same time.
Both junglers are just sitting in the lane brush, being like, "What do I do?"
Or they just perma fight around mid, trying to reclaim prio to see what happens. But we'll see. I mean, I think it will end up mattering a lot because both of those teams function. That's why I actually did vote for Knight MVP of LPL. Even though everyone is saying, but everyone in BLG is so good. It's like, well, their strategies and the way they play only work because mid is always pushed. Mid will always rotate first, and they can do whatever the fuck they want in enemy jungle, right? So I think that's gonna be a big factor. Unironically, I think the other things that will matter a lot are gonna be like bot lane, because I think that BLG bot, like, they're very good and they understand matchups and they're always playing for dives, but there are definitely games where they get so hypey that they just double int.
Oh my god, yeah.
And I mean, it's Pays, and everyone thinks Pays is like the worst player on the team anyway. So bot lane will matter a lot from that perspective, and I think that will be huge. I think that no matter what, both Keen and Bin will have an insane impact on the game and fights. And I think it'll be super fun. So that's why I think it'll just pivot around mid almost entirely. But I'm down to put BLG as winning this one. And then what would your predicted score be? Do you think it's going to be 5 games?
Yeah.
We'll just do 5 games then, for the sake of clarity here. All right, cool. Yeah, I think bot is an interesting one because I think this is definitely like, I don't think Genji's macro is the most insane ever. It is better than BLG's mid game, but like if BLG are going to lose because of mid game macro, they would lose to T1 probably. It's kind of my read on it, but we'll see. Next one, we may as well do T1 TES. And then call it. This one, like, so part of it is, like, I feel like Genji and BLG and T1 TES are less interesting matchups than the other matchups that we got, which were Genji TES, BLG T1, but we'll see. Because, like, in theory, these should be more evenly matched because it's the T2 seeds versus the T1 seeds, right? So, what are your thoughts on T1 TES?
I think
if it happens, since you still haven't, like, let the record show she is not committed to TES winning.
I have not committed. I'm trying to figure out Yeah, I'm still like I find myself leaning more and more to G2 the more I like talk myself into it. The
It's
weird
the
thing
problem
about
where it's
this
like,
matchup, not talk myself into it, but like go through like
yeah,
I actually do respect G2's mid game so much.
yeah.
But anyway, uh, if we're saying it's TES T1, I think that'll be interesting because again, Cream has had a weird showing at this tournament where he's had really good games and some pretty rough showings. And I think he still does not understand a lot of things that are like inherent to Faker's gameplay. That will just come with like more experience, right? Like this is his first international tournament. It's he's still really young. Tien was telling APA to shut up because Cream was nervous. I don't know if anyone heard that story, but I think it's kind of cute with Tien just coming out and defending his mid laner. But yeah, I think
I mean, Cream just looks like he's 12. So, everyone probably wants to take care of him on that team. It's just like, you want to get mad at him, but it's like, you can't get mad at him, He's just a kid. What's this thing? I'm sure Mako gets mad anyway.
Mako whipping the team into shape. I can see it. I think
Z515 was saying it was a mistranslation. What I had heard he said is he just wanted everyone to focus on the game, so that's why he told APA to shut up. But yeah, so
that's unlucky. It's a cute story, but if it is wrong, then we will say it's wrong. Trying to think of how T1 TES goes.
I guess the way
I feel like
I think about mid is it's less punishing to have a bad laning phase versus Faker than it is to have a bad laning phase versus Jovi. So if Cream is having a bad game, it's like slightly less forgiving, and TES are used to like enemy mid kind of out roaming them anyway. So I feel like that's not a significant advantage. And then they will just like swap around it, play around it, and I don't know. I think it's fun for sure because I feel like both of these teams have similar strengths. Arguably T1 does TS a little bit better. Arguably.
Yeah.
But also T1 have not looked insanely clean. And I feel like if TS beat G2, they can beat potentially.
Yeah, that's the weird thing, right? Because I'm like, oh, okay, if G2 go through, and obviously they're kicking themselves for losing to T1, but I think if T1 just draft a little differently, they beat G2 again, right? But if TES comes out and beats G2, it's weird because then they go up against T1, and if T1 were looking like they did in LCK finals, for example, I'd be like, oh, T1, no question. But they have also comparatively looked shakier at this event. So then it's like, okay, who is better on the day? And then if G2 comes through, it's like, if G2 comes through, I'm so talking myself into G2 making it through.
G2
but
I think win if they like. That's the thing. Like, it's
like how much do they readjust?
Now that we have acknowledged our TS bias, we're telling ourselves that G2 will obviously win. So yeah,
true.
That's the problem.
I also think the G2 rematch against T1 would just be super interesting because it's like, okay, if T1 ban out the G2 like OPs, right? Or like their pocket packs, essentially Mickey's Poppy, Broken Blade Zac. Then how does that series go differently? And even if Faker's targeted, is the team playing better?
That'll be interesting because I think like the series is like somewhat mid pick reliant as well. Like it's not like Faker has a super limited tramp pool, but you can limit Faker's functionality, and the problem is that Kareem is only so on a lot of different champs. Like Akali hasn't worked, but I think that's less to do with Akali being bad and more to do with, or less to do with like him being bad at Akali and more to do with like the health buffs didn't really help Akali with one wave clear and two like being able to find good flank angles if you're not winning sides. So
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. It's definitely it's for sure interesting, but I think like the TS T1 matchup, I think T1 probably will just win.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like it's crazy because the image of T1 like beating FlyQuest in 17 minutes is like so crazy because that's like they can be that good, but they can also be dog shit. So
I think if it's TES T1, I think T1 win. And then the only caveat to that, so like I would still say it probably goes all 5 games, but I think the caveat to that is if 369 is playing like he has all this tournament, it's definitely a T1 win. If he is stepping up a bit and just performing like what we saw from him at LPL level, which is still not the best he's ever played in his career, but is like serviceable enough, right? I then think it becomes a little bit more TES favored. But I like as things are from what we've seen from both of these teams at this tournament specifically, I would say T1 over TES 3-2.
I'm gonna look at my notes. Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean the T1 situations when they were not retaking weak side, to me that's like super fucking egregious. Like in their BLG series, that was a big problem. That's why I kind of just feel like they lose, no matter if it's TS or G2. I actually just feel like they lose. Because I think if they're ahead, if they're like winning and they're ahead on the map, they're fine. But if they're like even or behind, it's fucked. But
yeah,
unless everyone's just ARAMing at them, which G2 did in Game 5. Like in Game 5's T1, I think, kind of almost have a buff. Because they're super, like, Faker's just, like, super clutch in those scenarios, right?
yeah.
There is, like, a huge factor to that. So I think that there's something there. I also I wasn't super impressed by T1 macro in their last couple series, except for honestly, I do think they will probably ramp up in longer series. T1, so we'll see if it's like
it's
long
weird.
as possible.
It's weird because I also think like their execution of lane swaps and also just general like jungle tracking and like owner's positioning in relation to his lanes I think will improve. Like T1, a lot of this I am gonna give credit to Faker for, but like I do think they are very good not only at punishing opponents' mistakes when they can, like in the FlyQuest series, but also recognizing their own mistakes and being able to adjust it within a certain time frame for their next series. And I think that's like very, very valuable.
I think yeah, I think they are, but also my thing is about T1 is they had better lane swaps against BLG every time, but the problem with BLG and lane swaps is that they don't even acknowledge that the lane swap is happening. They just dive bot like normal. They just don't care. It's like, okay, chill. You guys do that. We're gonna 4-man bot. Wade, like we do that every game. Yeah, it seems good. You know. They actually just dive bot no matter what. I don't even think that that's a good thing to do in late swaps, but they just do it because that's how they play.
They
Like,
will do it.
there was the one game where Ben like just was down so much XP because T1 swapped and then they had the wave bouncing and he lost like 2 waves to the fucking bouncing wave before he went top and got XP, but it didn't seem to matter. So yeah, I don't know. It's weird because I feel like T1 are not even playing like insanely good swaps. They're just playing swaps like decently well, and um, yeah, we'll see because I think TS have a better concept of like how to play swaps out than T1 do. So
I mean, I think the other thing is the thing I'm specifically looking at that they're probably going to shore up again because I think in lane swap situations, teams, and this isn't just T1 because I think they have I think T1 overall have a good understanding of what they want out of a swap. It's just down to like positioning and execution. And I think the big thing, especially in the BLG series, is that Owner was caught out either because his like someone else, like another one of his lanes ends up like in game 4. Yeah, it was an Italy game where I'm pretty sure bot lane ended up contesting, or they wanted to contest, I think, the Italy, but were too late to do it. Essentially, like, I think BLG were able to get ahead through jungle advantage because Owner wasn't always positioned in the right spot to like take the most advantage from the swap. And I think that is some of these like minute rotations in terms of lane swap execution or something that they should be able to improve on before their next series.
okay, so you have T1.
Yes.
Okay. All right, I will take TS. So, yeah, I guess we'll figure that one out when it comes to it. It's our first stalemate. Okay, excellent. All right, so then we have Genji.
Fight.
Genji versus either of these teams. Then.
I mean, I definitely think Genji beat T1.
Wow.
I also think
rude. Go ahead. Sorry.
Wait, what happened to BLG? Why did I lose track of BLG?
Because you had BLG winning.
Yeah. Okay, never mind. Yeah, so then Genji beat T1 and then they make it. Yeah, okay.
I'll put the
sorry, I'm
bracket on
trolling.
stream.
Yeah. So yeah, I think Genji beat T1. I think they enact a very similar strategy to the same things they've been doing.
Is it 3-2 or is it just 3-0 or 3-1 this time?
I was gonna say 3-1.
Okay, 3-1. I don't know. I feel like I have way more faith in T1 than you do, despite the fact that I have had them losing to TES.
Actually, see, now that I'm thinking of like LCK finals, I'm like, oh, LCK finals were really close.
Yeah, I mean,
some of those games.
I feel like these
Kenya
teams
was
just
walking in
understand each
Kha'Zix.
other very well, you know, like.
Yeah, I'll go 3-2,
Yeah.
but I'll stay with Genji because I have to stick to my guns because Genji and my bracket are taking it all, and then they're facing BLG in the grand finals.
The stupid shit about my bracket is that I predicted BLG to win the whole tournament on the last Making the Rounds episode, and then I had BLG losing to fucking T1. And I'm just like, I don't know, I'm all over the place, man. It's fine. It's chill. In my predictions for this week. But yeah, I think they'll win. Genji will still win because I'm just like super disappointed in T1's last series. This is kind of recency bias, but I just am like disappointed dad kind of energy of, what the fuck? Why are you not retaking your weak side when you're coming out of base like 5 times in this game? What the fuck are you doing? What is wrong with you? You know, like this kind of energy. It's Coma IRL. Anyway. But you know that that's exactly what he's going to go over in the review, because that's like one of the most insane errors I've seen from a top team. So
Yeah.
yeah. In terms of map play, the
Yeah, I think. I mean, these two teams understand each other really well, but I think where Genji still gets the edge is, again, they'll enact a very similar ban strategy. They'll play through their mid prio, and they will win.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And then what if so let's say TES win this one. TES versus Genji. Is it just a repeat of what happened before?
Ooh, that's interesting. Because I actually do think, to your point, it's the same way that I'm looking at TL, right? That I looked at TL versus Fnatic or TL versus Hunters, where like in my head I'm like, well, if TES can make things really volatile early, then they have a chance at winning.
Unless you have to
I would still favor Genji, because apparently I'm a Genji like enthusiast, which is what this is revealed. But I feel like we'd see something really, really similar in terms of what we saw from their first meeting looked like. All 5 games, where it would look very decisive in favor of one team, depending on how the swap / mid pressure goes early, and whichever team comes out ahead of that in like the first like 5 or 10 minutes is going to be the team that takes that game. And then it's going to go all 5 games.
Okay, so you have Gen 3 to TES again.
Yeah.
So I think because of Cream...
Oh my god, you're taking TES all the way,
no,
aren't you?
I mean, I did in my bracket, but I don't think that's happening. Because I actually was going to go the other way. I think because of the fact that they played against Cream and they have like a better idea of like the draft phase that worked, they will bench Rist, and it'll be harder to play. So it could be like 3-1. Even though I'm like very sus on Genji for some reason. I don't know why I'm so sus on Genji in particular. But I do have TES winning. I did go into the tournament predicting TES to win MSI, and then in the last episode of making the rounds, I predicted BLG, and then for some reason I had BLG losing to fucking T1. Anyway, in my bracket, so I'm just like playing all the angles apparently.
Yeah, you are like beating out Raz for the flip-flop allegations.
For the flip-flop allegations? No, but it is like, I guess the point of this exercise is to talk theoretically about how the matchups could go.
Yeah.
And to talk about the fact that I do think this is like one of the most insanely high levels of parity of an MSI that we've had, right?
It's so fun, actually.
Yeah.
Like, so many of the outcomes are super interesting, because then you get to talk about like how it happened. Yeah. Also, what you're doing reminds me of something that Mark used to joke around about, where he'd be like, well, I predicted this LCS team to win on the broadcast, but on the dive, I predicted the opposite. So either way, I'm right.
And that was like my 2014 thing when the LPL team started to lose. I would predict them to win, but then I would bet on whatever team they were playing against. So I would like make money to comfort myself. This is 2015 off of the LPL team's world loss. So I actually made some money off of LPL teams losing a world, so it was a good time. I was the original Forest within, or Forest without, whatever.
Oh.
Bangers. Angry better. Let's see. I think the next one is gonna be, so like, since we're doing this, I actually want to do G2 as well, just because we had the maybe G2 angle. So Genji G2, because that's like an interesting one that may or may not happen. Could happen, but is a fun thought experiment at least.
Yeah, I think this is another, like, do Genji do their homework, which I think they will. But then also, I don't know. I know I give Genji more credit for their mid game macro than you do. I think they can be really, really smart on the map, similarly to G2. I also think that Genji, in terms of how they're going to be setting up fights, especially if they are playing something with a lot of poke and like playing very patiently around fog, they should be able to suffocate G2 or like essentially compositionally depending force G2 to come to them in a slightly more disadvantageous position. Which is kind of how I see that matchup going. So I actually think if G2 make it through TES, which I'm like becoming increasingly certain they will. Genji is going to be like, if Genji is dropping down and they end up facing Genji in the lower bracket, I think Genji is going to be a tall task for them because of that. Because I think in some of those objective and mid game setups for team fights around neutrals, I do think that I really appreciate, again, especially when Chovy is on something like a Corki, their understanding of like how they can play and poke with Fog of War and how they can set up so that if their opponent, like, even if their opponent has a good engage comp to get on them, they essentially can force their opponent to come to them so that they still have some sort of advantage. Which is kind of how I see the like Genji G2 matchup going. I still think that you should just ban Mickey's Poppy. Even though I know like Carria has played it like G2. I'm pretty sure he played it in the Genji series in the LSK finals. Yeah. So it's like, it's not like they haven't seen that champion and or like don't know what she does. But since Mickey has been so good on that champion, I would honestly just ban it first rotation. And I also think some of the issues that Genji's bot lane had against like the likes of Jackie and Mako, for example, I don't think they'll have similar issues against G2's bot lane.
Okay, so it sounds like no matter what, Genji is winning this from your perspective.
So from my perspective, I think either Genji or BLG are winning it.
Do you have 3-1?
And I think I'm giving
or...
the edge to I'm giving the edge to Genji.
Okay, do you have 3-1 or 3-2 G2?
For Genji G2?
Yeah.
For that matchup, provided that they ban out G2 pocket picks, I would say Gen G3, G2 1.
Okay. Alright, so I don't know if anyone...
I weirdly think Gen G have a much better matchup into T1 than they do into... Or, I think G2 have a much better matchup into T1 than they do into Gen G, based on playstyle.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's pretty universally true. I think Genji will punish early game a lot more. Also. And Genji will also play fights better usually. Okay. Yeah, so I don't know if anyone can actually read this fucking bracket catastrophe, but the bracket catastrophe is basically there. It sounds like no matter what, Genji is winning, unless it's like me with the TES copium. We're just gonna like TS copium right here. This one. TS 3-2 Genji, yes. TS copium winning the day.
Wow. Oh my god. I can't even see it because again, my internet is so bad that it like freaked out, and so it's just like a black screen with like the loading dial thing. But all
Yeah.
I see is Glaze it, Kelsey, dare to glaze for TES. The TES status,
So
please. Amazing.
yeah, I mean our bracket is a giant train wreck and it's unreadable basically because I have like four
Nice.
scores next to every series in the under bracket pretty much like that don't make any sense. And then under the fourth one, which is TES 3-2 Gen, I said TS glazing cannot be stopped. So that's that's what we have right now. All right.
There's the title of the episode.
TS glazing is unhinged at the moment. All right. So it sounds like Gen is the we'll just put the 3 here and then we can interpret that however we want. All right, BLG Gen G. What do we got? It sounds like we're boring and that's the grand final. So, what do we got?
Yeah. So
In
I
most
think this is going
cases.
to be the grand final.
Mhm.
I think that so basically, like I said, I had BLG winning the first time they matched up, and then Gen G readjusting and winning this matchup. I still think it would be really, really close. Again, I think the two teams that I favor the most to take this tournament based on the play that I've seen thus far are BLG and Gen G. And then I would give the edge to Gen G in the finals. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, is it like 3-2, 3-1?
I still think it would be 3.
Because we've already talked about this matchup.
I still think it'd be 3-2. Yeah. We've already talked about how these teams match up. So I think the big thing, I'll like talk about the big differences. I think in the rematch, Gen G will really, really hard focus on getting mid prio, which I think both teams are gonna do anyway, but they will win the mid prio battle. And then a lot of it will come down to how both teams play with their bot and top laners. And I think some of BLG's tendencies to still try to like rail their opponents with their bot lane will get punished by Gen G pretty hard, especially if they swap. And then I also, again, I actually don't know who comes out ahead in terms of like team fighting between Bin and Keen. I think they're both playing really, really well right now.
Yeah.
So I was looking forward to seeing that matchup again.
Okay, I have I don't know. I just decided that we're too boring, so I just wrote BLG 3-0 Gen G Pog. And that's my grand finals prediction. There we go. I don't know. I just think that
You're the complete opposite direction of me. I love it.
I mean, I think Gen G, like BLG, like pressure early game extremely well. They team fight extremely well. I don't think Gen G's mid game macro is like extremely sophisticated. And BLG are fine. I think BLG match up better versus Gen G than versus T1, and they slaughtered T1. And I also think that you made the point about Gen G like adapting between series and growing well. I think BLG from the start of the season, who like would get a 10k gold lead at 15 minutes and then like elongate the game to like 40 minutes for 0. Like they're a very different team now. I actually think they've improved a significant amount, even though I still like flame their mid game. I think they've gotten a lot better and they're not like as mindless as they were, and their team fighting is just like the best, I think, in the world. So I don't know. I think BLG, it's very easy to favor them against a team like Gen G. Like I think the way to beat them would be to lane swap, stabilize XP lead on AD really well, even if top dies, and then just completely out rotate them on the map, which I don't think Gen G will do. So that's kind of like where I am on that series. I think the other element for me is like I am Glazing TES, so of course, and I called TS when MSI at the start of the tournament, so we must stop flip flopping and hold the line, Emily. So no matter what, it's a
Wow.
victory for China and Chengdu, okay? And regional rivalries, back full circle. It doesn't matter. China wins these. Yeah.
Okay.
No. I mean,
I'm sticking with my prediction of Genji. Obviously,
yeah.
I will not flip flop.
No, I mean,
I will stick to my L's if there are L's.
I
but
think
I
like
actually do think Genji are really, really good. And I think
yeah.
from what we've seen at this tournament, Genji and BLG are the two. Like, obviously, there is a lot of parity. A lot of teams are playing well. And the matchups are really interesting as we've just gone through all of them. But I would give the edge to either Genji or BLG as like the two teams who have looked the best.
Yeah, I think I would still give it to BLG. I think. Yeah, I think like my real prediction is I think BLG win the whole thing at this point.
Ooh.
So that is like probably my real prediction based on the information that we have at this point, because it is like what I just said is consistent with my prediction, which is I think the way you beat BLG is you stabilize early game in a lane swap. You out-rotate them on the map like really consistently in mid game, and I think you just like entirely avoid team fights because I think their team fights are too good. I think it's very easy to get a pick on mid versus Genji. I think that Chovy inside lane doesn't generate as much pressure as Knight does. And yeah, I mean, I guess that's like my I think BLG is just like a way better matchup into Genji than they are into T1. And so I think BLG will probably take it, but we'll see.
Interesting.
See, but I
Game
think
should be.
there was Raz did make a valid point against your flip flopping, Emily, which is that even though you don't flip flop, you then bring up that if I did flip flop, I would say this, but I don't flip flop. So you just play both sides, you know? I'm just saying.
I will take the L and then I will give context as to how the other team can win.
You will take
the Emily classic.
You will take the L and then you will be like, if only I didn't have my principles, I would have changed my prediction.
They call that soft flopping. I love it.
So yeah, that's it for the show today. I think like as a bonus topic, okay, I need to ask this question since we've decided that you've decided that TES will lose to Gen G, right? Or not Gen G, G2, the other G team. Since you've decided TS will lose to G2, I have to ask you this very relevant question. Would Han Sama save Mickey X from drowning?
Ooh. Okay, how much do I trust? This is because Mako said that he thought Jackie Love would save him.
Mm-hmm. Or at least try.
Of all of the ADCs, of all of the ADCs he has been with, he said that Jackie Love would definitely dive in to save him if he was drowning. And so now this is the drowning... People have now named it the drowning ADC meta, I guess because they think that Jackie Love is just going to drown in his attempt to save Mako. I'm not really sure, but I feel like that has to be the reason why we've dubbed it the drowning ADC meta as opposed to the drowning support meta. Do I think Hans would dive in to save Mickey? Yes. I'll go yes. I'm not sure how well Han Sama can swim, but I feel like he seems like a nice enough person that he would make the attempt.
I think Han Sama is a very nice person, but he would probably try to save Mickey X, fail, and then paint about it. So it would fit his image, no? Like it would definitely fit his like emo artist image if that happened. Anyway.
You know what it reminded me of when people were like, Jackie would definitely make the attempt? It reminded me of Jackie's Tom Kench
Mm-hmm.
when Wang Shichong, I am not pronouncing his name correctly, and I know I am not. I'm so
Yeah,
sorry.
Wang Shizong, all good.
When when he subbed himself in, and Jackie just played Tom Hench and like ate him. Like his one job was
Yeah.
literally to eat his boss. Hans is smaller than Mickey. They're dying.
Yeah,
They're both like
and
they're both genetically taller and larger than me, so like I actually can't attest to that.
and Mickey X is going into the Sichuan River for sure. Was I'm Griffin's prediction. So yeah.
Yeah, I like Noah who said, I appreciate Emily not wanting to think bad about Hans, but I can't picture that happening.
Yeah,
I'm
pretty
not
much.
sure if Noah is saying that Hans wouldn't make the attempt or that Hans would fail in his attempt and they would both die.
Pretty much. But anyway, with that one, we'll see you guys probably after MSI is over. I'll try to edit this episode and get it up as soon as possible, just so that it's relevant.
Yeah.
It's up because it was like normal time last week for consistency, but 2 series had already happened, so that was unfortunate.
Yeah.
So I'll just try to get it up early this week as a bonus. But
thank you for your hard work.
Yeah, exactly.
Now Noah fully does not believe in Hans, by the way. I state that he would not even attempt it.
Yeah, the IG boss story is great because it was like, I don't know. It reminds me of, like, there was in the EU Masters, there was actually a sequence where, I forget which team it was, where it was like the owner subbed himself in, and then he did this like 3-hour stream where he was like justifying it. And it was great.
He was also like ripping apart the other players, wasn't he?
It was like,
he was like, well, if we just listen to my calls or something like that.
Yeah, there was one, like, I think Veteran asked him in chat, like, who do you think let you down the most? And he actually gave it an honest answer.
Oh, God, no. Oh, no.
It was spectacular. But I mean, that guy just dreams of being Once It's Song and winning his only competitive appearance, apparently. So, yeah, that's unfortunate.
They literally changed the LPL rules after that, by the way.
Yeah,
for those that don't know.
Is Wang Sitsong like the winningest LPL player of all time? I think it could be true.
God. That's so cursed. He won 1 series against Vici Gaming.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about the IG rumors this episode. If they're still relevant, we can talk about them in the future. But
same with like off-season rumors. We'll do an episode. Obviously not the Monday after, only because I will be flying back, but the week I get back.
Currently planning a big video on the LPL format analysis, which should be super fun. But yeah.
Nice. I'll look forward to it.
Should be good. All right, everyone. Have a good one. We will see you around. Thanks for tuning in for the episode, and see you for some banger MSI games.